All right, today we're stepping into the crucible. We're heading back to 19th century France, onto the unforgiving training grounds that forged the strategists for Napoleon's armies. And we're not just here to talk about battlefield glory. No, we're here to look at the relentless, intellectual, and technical gauntlet that was built on one simple, brutal idea: that the mind is the sharpest weapon a soldier can possibly wield.
And this quote from Lazare Carnot, man, it just cuts right to the heart of it. He was the architect of this whole new military philosophy. See, in the chaos after the French Revolution, France learned a really hard lesson. Passion and bravery, they might win you a skirmish, but they don't win wars. Carnot knew that victory demanded a completely new breed of officer, one defined not by who your father was, or even by guts alone, but by an absolute mastery of the hard sciences of warfare. So the very first filter for this new officer was the École Polytechnique. And you gotta forget any idea you have of a simple military academy. This was a forge for the mind, a place where the brightest in the nation were put through an intellectual trial by fire. It was designed to find not just soldiers, but scholars, people who could truly understand the deep, complex mechanics of modern war.
I mean, just take a look at the sheer scope of knowledge you needed before you even sat for the exam. This is so far beyond basic drills. We're talking chemistry, right? So you can understand gunpowder. Descriptive geometry so you can build fortifications. And it didn't stop there. History, geography, multiple languages, including Latin. The goal here wasn't just to teach you one thing. It was to build a complete intellectual arsenal. This was the foundation of that mental discipline. And this is how they tested that discipline. The entrance exam wasn't just a quick test. It was a grueling 24-hour marathon spread out over 7 different sittings. I mean, look at the time. 4 hours for descriptive geometry, another 3 hours dedicated just to logarithmic calculations. This wasn't only about what you knew. It was a brutal test of your mental endurance and your precision under insane pressure. One slip, one moment of fatigue, and your career was over before it even had a chance to begin.
Now, for the few who actually survived the Polytechnique, the next stage was the School of Application at Metz. And this is where all that abstract theory was hammered into lethal, practical expertise. This is where future artillery and engineering officers learned to turn their deep knowledge of physics and geometry into actual weapons and fortifications. You could say Metz was the laboratory where the science of war became the art of victory. So you have to understand the core principle at Metz was zero error. There was just no margin for mistakes. A miscalculation in your math wasn't an academic failure that got you a bad grade, it was treated as a simulated catastrophe. A badly calculated artillery trajectory? Well, that could mean shelling your own troops. A tiny flaw in a fortification design, that's a weakness the enemy will exploit. In this high-stakes world, technical mastery wasn't just a goal, it was a matter of life and death, and absolute perfection was the only standard. And you can see that zero-error principle in action right here. This is the incredibly meticulous process for something as basic as building an artillery battery. It all starts with scientific surveys, moves on to detailed architectural drawings, complex calculations, and then precise engineering layouts. These students had to take pure theory and translate it into a tangible military asset, proving they couldn't just understand the concepts, but that they could execute them flawlessly out in the field. But here's the thing. Technical skill and brainpower alone were not enough. The system was obsessed with finding officers of solid character and unwavering diligence. So it wasn't about one single brilliant performance on an exam. No, it was a system of constant, relentless evaluation designed to measure a candidate's consistency and dedication over a long period of time. They weren't just building problem solvers, they were building leaders. And this chart really breaks down how they measured that character. The big final exam, while it was important, was only about a third of a student's final grade. The vast majority, a full 65%, was determined by their continuous performance. We're talking weekly exams, assignments, even their record from the year before. This system put immense weight on day-to-day hard work, making sure that only the most consistent and dedicated candidates would ever rise to the top. 6 out of 20, this number. This was the razor's edge. It was the absolute minimum average a student had to maintain across everything, just to survive. And if you fell below that line, the consequence was brutally simple: excluded from the school. That was it. No do-overs, no second chances, unless you had a serious, documented illness. The system was designed from the ground up to be absolute and unforgiving, because it was mirroring the reality of the battlefield they were all being trained for. Sustained underperformance meant you were out, immediately, and for good. So, after years of this relentless pressure, you get to the final judgment. And this wasn't just someone checking your grades. A jury of senior officers would scrutinize every single aspect of your record, your academic performance, your practical work, your conduct, all to determine if you were truly worthy of a commission. And just look at who was sitting on this jury. We're talking about the highest authorities in the whole institution, from the commandant himself to the very examiners who had been testing them all along. This was not a rubber stamp. It was a final, holistic review of a candidate's entire merit. It was a check to make sure the numbers matched the man, and that only those who embodied the complete ideal of the French officer, intellect, skill, and character, were allowed into the corps.
So what was the result of this entire brutal process? It was a military elite unlike any other in the world at the time. These men weren't just commanders, they were engineers, scientists, and meticulous planners. Forged in the twin fires of intellectual rigor and unwavering discipline, they became the technical and strategic backbone of the French army, capable of pulling off complex campaigns and engineering marvels that were the envy of all of Europe. And that leaves us with one final big question. In our own era, with our own complex challenges, what can we learn from a system that simply refused to compromise? A system that demanded of its leaders not just competence, but total mastery. Mastery of their subject, of their skills, and ultimately, of themselves.